everyone, hope you enjoyed that intro. While turning a 0 cost ice into a 12 rest cost one is an ideal best case scenario, we are gonna try to make that happen today in our game versus Andromeda. Keep in mind that I still don't know that this is Stealth Andromeda yet. In my mind, it's probably just a regular run-based Andromeda with Temujin, hence I start with the opener of Triple Ice, as you always like to do against someone who might be running Temujin. Crick on Archives, Yaguru on R&D, DNA Tracker on HQ leaves me very vulnerable to a turn 1 Siphon. I'm hoping my opponent doesn't do that, and sure enough, they do a setup phase for the turn 1. So that's good for me. I have the option of clicking for credits. You would normally want to click for 3 credits to go up to 8 to rest the DNA Tracker here, but because I knew my opponent would be definitely drawing at the start of their turn with Earthrise, I simply clicked up to 7 and used the spare click to install the Chrysium on HQ. This fully protects me from Siphon and any other shenanigans like Polop or Emergency Shutdown, which is what you want. Now I continue drawing into cards. I want to find my money and I want to find my Mutate combo. And I do find both. Not the combo though. I still need to find the Hasty Relocation to get a guaranteed combo off. Also, this combo, the Mutate combo, only works when you actually have a rest piece of ice that you actually want to mutate. And my opponent's not really running yet. They are still in the setup phase. They have 2 of their 3 breakers out. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to draw again because my hand's looking quite bad. Every single card I don't want to pitch at this point. 2 mutates are good, 3 agendas cannot be pitched. And my opponent goes for Archives here. Okay, yeah, now this is the problem with an Archives Crick, isn't it? It's good deterrence, but when your opponent actually starts poking at it, it falls flat very quickly. There's nothing for me to recur with the Crick, so I'm not going to res it. But for some reason or another, I cave in on the final click to res it. I'm doing this here because it gives me an additional mutate option should I want to do so. So now I could potentially play the mutate on the Crick on Archives, but do I really want to? There's still a lot of small ice in my deck. I've drawn a couple of big ice, a DNA Tracker on HQ, and a Susano on the remote. So yeah, mutate doesn't seem like the best idea. For those of you wondering why on earth am I installing a Susano on the remote, well, that's true. I shouldn't be. Susano is incredibly bad against this matchup. As you might be able to tell, it breaks for only 2 stealth credits. But what I want the Susano there for is for deterrence. Again, the threat of an unrest ice is enough to scare away most runners, and this one doesn't seem like an exception. They allow me to score the first Nisei, which is going to be a huge deal. I'm so happy my opponent did not run into that, because it would have set me quite far back if I was forced to rest DNA Tracker into Eli 1.0. My opponent finally gets their entire rig going, and now they can place pressure on any server they wish to. This is a pretty strong stealth rig, although it will run out of Ghost Runner stealth credits eventually. I attempt to drain it right here by resing the DNA Tracker. My opponent uses Tracker, but Tracker doesn't do very well against my Tracker, which tracks down my opponent unless they pay the iron price. 2 stealth credits and 2 normal credits to break, 2 subroutines to bypass 1 subroutine, and my opponent accesses a mutate from HQ. 3 and 5, my opponent misses. I got pretty lucky there, and forcing my opponent to trash the Chrysium. Okay, we have the combo online. Hasty Relocation is online. This is good. Now, do I play it right now? The problem is, the 2 ice are not that tempting of targets. Crick is... you don't really want to put a big piece of ice on Archives when it's not going to do much, and you don't really want to mutate a DNA Tracker on HQ. So what I'm going to do here is the top deck NAPD, NAPD, and the topmost card is a Chiyashi, after drawing the Chiyashi from Hasty Relocation. This allows me to mutate my DNA Tracker into a Chiyashi. It's a small upgrade, 8 res cost to 12 res cost, but I think this was a huge upgrade for me. Why? Because given that my opponent's on the stealth suite, sentries mean nothing, code gates don't mean much. You want to have big barriers against your opponent, especially on your key server, HQ. This is where my opponent can exploit me with all sorts of nasty tricks, from Siphon to Shutdown to Polop. And Chiyashi just stops that flat in the face. So I absolutely love that mutate. Thankfully, I managed to draw the Chiyashi from the Hasty Relocation. Otherwise, things might have gone awry. You might have also noticed something. That Hasty Relocation basically acted as a Jackson at the same time. You notice the NAPD suddenly disappeared from my hand. The agendas are gone. Why? Because when I put them back on top of my deck, and then I use mutate allowed me to shuffle my deck, thereby reshuffling the agendas back into my deck. In essence, I basically did a Jackson right there. Oh, this is fantastic. So I'm no longer agenda flooded, and I can continue setting up my servers to stop my opponent from getting Temujin money. My opponent Temujin's archives against a crick, and that's completely fine because my opponent is forced to use tracker to track through crick, essentially meaning that they waste 2 credits every time they do a Temujin run. I'm happy with that. Crick is doing its job right there. For just 1 res cost, it's forcing my opponent to lose 2 credits per run. That's good. Now, sec testing comes out, and this worries me a bit more. Sec testing makes the archives runs a lot more worth it, and when Netrunner is compounded onto it, my opponent's going to get a lot of mileage if I leave archives undefended. So here, I'm definitely forced to actually ice archives with a big, bulky DNA tracker right here. And I will have to hard res it if my opponent goes for it, which they do. So here's the DNA tracker. I say, you have to blow all your stealth credits. Basically, you're not gaining stealth credits on Netrunner, and that's a big deal. Going back to my remote, if I can amass the money to res both the DNA tracker on the outside and the Susano on the inside, what this means is that I'm going to be able to tax my opponent out of stealth credits, and that's a big deal. Against Smoke, you can't really do that, but since Andromeda has a slower start, you are able to actually ice up the centrals pretty well. Not to mention that Switchblade is very stealth intensive. Now, my opponent swings over to R&D thinking that I'm too poor. With only 3 credits to res ice, I'm actually able to res both ice on R&D, both the pup and the Yagura, taxing out my opponent just a bit. Unfortunately, pup is not the best ice here either, as my opponent can break it for simply just 1 stealth credit with that Switchblade and the Silencer. So yeah, this is still not looking the best for me. I need to find a way to stabilize at this point. Having spent all my money on resing Central Ice, I'm now pretty poor. I can't even play the Celeb gift from my hand, which is a pity. I need the money to threaten ice reses on the remote to begin scoring out future agendas. But my opponent's going to continue placing pressure, and they have no reason not to. They have the entire Breaker Suite set up. They need to start accumulating stealth credits and money before I completely seal off the centrals. It's amazing how just a single Hiyashi can just completely wall off our HQ like this. There is absolutely no incentive for my opponent to run HQ here at all. Here comes the first major decision of the game. Do I res the Eli against my opponent's dirty laundry on my remote? Here I chose not to. A bit of a questionable decision. I don't know if that was correct, because if I res the Eli here, I could still potentially play Celeb Gift next turn. The reason I did not do so, I don't know. Because it didn't seem to tax stealth credits, I guess. But I really don't know about that. To come my turn, I did a Celeb Gift into a Mutate on the outermost pup on R&D, and it became an Eli. Not too bad of a trade. It's better than the previous pup, but not by much. However, this should ensure that my opponent doesn't get free runs of R&D every single turn, which is pretty important. And with remaining money from my Celeb Gift, I'm able to rest the outermost DNA tracker to stop my opponent from accumulating Netrunner credits on the remote. As long as you have open servers, your opponent can translate Silencer credits into Netrunner credits, and this is exactly what you want to avoid. So in the meantime, I'm just clicking for credits here because this deck is so credit intensive. Even though I'm supposed to cheat out Big Ice with the Mutate combo, I'm still forced to res a lot of Big Ice. So far, I've already res 2 DNA trackers the hard way, and actually 3. The DNA tracker on HQ was also hard res, so I have actually spent a lot of money this game. That's actually quite important to note. This deck still needs money. You can't just remove your restructures and Celeb Gifts now that you have the combo. Now this is where we enter the mid to late game, where mistakes start happening rampantly. I will probably make some really bad misplays here. If you spot any of them, be sure to leave a comment in the comment section. I'd like to hear on how I can improve my play. In the meantime, my opponent laundries R&D to fetch a food, which is a bit of a problem because I actually want that food. There are only 2 foods in the deck. I'll need to score 1 of them to win the game, otherwise I have to go for 4 agenda scores, which is pretty annoying. Although I could, because I have all the agendas I need in my hand right now, and my opponent isn't really going to be able to contest HQ. Now, I want to talk a bit about Friends in High Places, which you see me play 2 copies of in this deck. Friends is actually a very useful card, both for ensuring that Chrysium stays on HQ. This is a very, very important piece of tech against the many Siphon and Vam decks that are running around nowadays. Polop as well, which is a big problem for this deck. Having a Chrysium Grid just solves it. So I can rest the Chrysium Grid here. If you wonder why I'm doing this, it's because I'm respecting Polop. By this time, my opponent has drawn most of the deck and has 4 errand counters. I cannot afford to let my opponent get a Polop on the table, so the Chrysium Grid has to be rest here. It cost me 3 credits, but I have to do it. I will replace the Crisium Grid on HQ in time if my opponent doesn't rerun HQ. And because there's a Chiashi on HQ, there's no way my opponent is rerunning it. So this is good for me. As long as I'm able to perpetually keep HQ Crisium, my opponent will be forced to make very uneconomical runs on either R&D or... Ooh, bad boy incoming, bad boy plays Siphon. Okay, so I guess that's a thing, and my opponent blasts through the Siphon with a bunch of stealth credits and takes 2 net damage. I immediately knee-jerk end the run with the Nisei token. No way I'm getting Siphon here, no way in heck. Because I know my opponents on very few credits, they only have 1 Net Merker credit and 1 Ghost Runner credit, I knew they would require at least 2 turns to recover. It will be 2 turns before they can contest HQ again. So I'm more than happy to abuse this scoring window to jam out a second Nisei Mark II. And this is why I used the first Nisei token. I knew that I could spend it liberally, knowing that I would receive a second token pretty soon. My opponent plays pretty smart though. They begin realizing that a very good tactic they can do is actually to repeatedly run R&D. Because the outermost ice of R&D is not a spiky piece of ice, it doesn't force the runner to break it, my opponent can simply slam into it, jack out, slam into it, jack out to accumulate turning wheel counters, and that is going to be a big threat to my endgame. Thankfully, my opponent isn't ramming into R&D that often though, although it's a very good idea for them to do so. They're only doing it once per turn just to charge up their Net Merker with Silencer. In this case, my opponent's going to do so with a Dirty Laundry to get laundry money as well. So they're getting a lot of value out of this R&D that's not very well protected. And that's kind of a pity because I did mutate the outermost ice of R&D, and if it had mutated into a second Chiyashi or I don't know, a DNA tracker, the last one's probably in the bin, so I guess there wasn't much chance of me finding a good piece of ice to mutate into at that point. But I would really love to seal up R&D with one of my spiky, chunky ice on the outside. And you see how difficult this deck is to actually get everything lined up. Against a stealth deck, you can get severely punished if your server defenses are too weak, and that's happening right now as my opponent bursts into life. Returns from the dead. He's back to life with 10 credits, a bunch of Net Merker credits, and only now am I beginning to find a way to defend HQ once more by reinstalling the Crisium on HQ. I also draw into a second copy of Friends, so I still am able to recur Crisium Grid if need be. In the meantime, I will also need a bunch more credits. At this point, my win condition, I'm pretty much tunneled into my win condition. I'm going to slowly draw through my deck with the mandatory draw, taking 3 credits each turn with my clicks, because the best way to play this matchup is to turtle for the long game. The moment I draw into a Global Food Initiative, my second and final one, that's when I start jamming it into the remote and forcing my opponent to contest it. The thing is, with only 1 Nisei token remaining, I need to actually get full mileage out of it. So ideally, the Nisei token should be used to stop my opponent from contesting my remote, not for preventing siphons. We don't want that. So let's continue on the game as my opponent drops a Temujin on R&D. Oof, okay. So this basically screams you better protect R&D at this point. You notice that I haven't found a single Jackson Howard yet, and this is really curious. Recursion is actually pretty important in this deck. Not only do I need to thicken my R&D, there's still quite a lot of agendas left in R&D, and I really don't want my opponent to be fetching them on Temujin runs. Since it costs 4 to break Kuroda, break Eli with Kuroda, and my opponent gets 4 credits off Temujin, R&D runs are essentially free at this point. So I need to find a way to show up R&D's defenses ASAP. But going back to recursion, Friends, another important purpose of Friends is to actually recur the ice that has been trashed due to the mutate combo. When you play mutate, you are forced to trash the ice that you targeted to replace it with a new ice. This means that you essentially have less ice in your deck. Fewer. So when the ice is in the bin, you need to play Friends to recur the ice back on somewhere else so that you can have lots of ice on the table. So this is a play that I would like to see, that I actually used actually. The pub that was previously on R&D was actually Friends into play. Okay, so I'm gonna use Friends here right now because, as I mentioned, I notice the R&D threat and I need to actually prevent my opponent from getting to R&D. So here we have Chrysium and Caprice on R&D. They are best friends. Caprice decided to abandon Ashe and go with Chrysium Grid instead. So this is a very oppressive server for my opponent. They have to win the side game, and even if they do, they cannot liberate their Temujin or Desperado money. They must first trash the Chrysium Grid. So this is a very big pain for my opponent, and it is a serious deterrence from running R&D, knowing that it's pretty credit intensive. And this is what's so great about Chrysium Grid. It's so powerful against all these run-based decks. My opponent's basically forced to spend 6 credits here to get to the base of the server they don't know if they will successfully run through. You'll notice that I pre-res Chrysium Grid before my opponent began running. This was because I had to respect Interdiction from my opponent. Very well a card they could be running, and Interdiction just completely hoses this Chrysium Caprice play. So I res a Caprice here and spend 2 credits to keep my opponent out with the side game. I knew how important this side game was, because if I fail the side game, my opponent gets entry into R&D again, and that's not good. So I'm going to continue clicking for credits here, again letting my mandatory draw do the work, and letting Caprice work her magic. In the meantime, I just need to work on my economy to ensure that I can actually score out for the win at the end of the day. My opponent's already on 6 agenda points, so this is very scary because I know the wins in hand, 2 NAPDs in hand. If my opponent decides to run HQ for some reason, I'm completely done. With not much in the way of defending HQ, sorry. So my opponent tries for R&D again, but doesn't go all the way through. As I was alluding to earlier, the best plays my opponent could make is to simply headbutt themselves into the Eli as many times as possible in the turn to chalk up those turning wheel counters. That way they can make one big impactful run at the end of the day to seal the game. I Jackson here, and after thinking about it, I was very tempted to play the Mutate here at this point just to get rid of the Eli on R&D. But after some thought, I realized that I needed to rid of the agendas in hand because my opponent was very likely going to run HQ sooner or later. I make a big mistake here. I ditch the Chiashi into the bin and then reshuffle it back with Jackson, thinking that this would heighten my chances of hitting a Chiashi when I mutate the Eli on R&D. What I did not realize was, or rather, I just completely overlooked this. With the Jackson draw, I actually drew Hasty Relocation as well. So there was absolutely no need for me to thicken R&D with more Chiashis. All I needed to do was to hold the Chiashi in hand so I could top deck it with the Hasty Relocation. That was a big mistake for me. In the meantime, I'll just take more credits, and I plan to actually do the Chiashi combo, the Hasty combo next turn. In retrospect, I could have done the Hasty combo this turn. I'm not sure why I decided to take 3 credits instead. I really need to actually evolve the Eli that's on R&D right now, as it's giving my opponent a lot of leverage. With that, they can swing over to HQ. With 9 turning wheel counters, my opponent suspects that I have an agenda in hand, running through HQ, and is about to access the NAPD. I know they have enough credits because they're going to get Desperado money, and they have 4 Ghost Runner credits and 7 Netmerker credits, which can be used for anything at all, including stealing NAPDs. So I let my opponent in, but they use turning wheel counters. 3 of them, in fact. Gonna see 4 of my 5 cards that will win them the game outright 80% of the time. I can't have that. I have to resort to my last line of defense. I said I didn't want to, but I'm forced into the corner here. I used the Nisei token. I didn't have a choice here, and my opponent very wisely chose not to expend all their turning wheel counters. By expending exactly 6 of them, my opponent now has 4 remaining, which allows them to run HQ again if they so wish, which they obviously do, sniffing that there's something up with this very liberal use of Nisei Mark II, and goes for HQ, smelling the blood in the water like a shark, going for my NAPD. At this point, there was nothing that was going to stop them. I could res the Chrysium on HQ, but that's not going to stop Turning Wheel from coming into effect. That's the best I can do. I'm just going to res it to make sure that my opponent can't drop the Polyp. They see 3 of 5 cards, 60% chance to win, they're probably going to get it. Restructure, Vanilla, oh, Mutate! Whew, I escaped that one, so luckily. I didn't deserve that. The game would have been over there. But instead, we live on to fight another day. And my opponents broke. They spent all their Netmerker credits they have been hoarding up so far, all those R&D runs worth of head bashing, did not come to fruition at all. Unfortunately for me, I'm just drawing all my NAPDs. That's not what I want. I want to see the global food. I'm looking at my deck right now. What are the ice left in my deck? And I figured that there were no more small ice left. The only ice left in there actually had to be Chiashi. So I just went for a hasty relocate. And yep, okay, so I'm gonna drop all the NAPDs back into the deck. And then mutate out that Chiashi, shuffling the deck, making sure the NAPDs stay in the deck. There we go. That's more like it. Now my opponent cannot recover by bouncing off R&D to farm turning wheel counters. Now I have every single one of my servers protected by a gigantic piece of pain in the neck, or whatever you call it. These eyes are horrendous to deal with. I love them. Mutate is so great. But it took me forever to get to this point, and unfortunately, if you looked at my bin just now, yeah, you will realize that I accidentally milled a Nisei Mark II while I was performing the mutate combo into the Chiashi on R&D just now. All my opponent needs to do right now, I'm not sure if they know this or not, is to simply run archives for the win. That's it. There are still 2 Jackson Howards in play. There are 2 of them left in the deck. I haven't really been seeing my Jackson Howards this game. A single Jackson Howard top deck would help me a lot. Ooh, global food. Now, I could not, unfortunately, go for the global food score here because I was too poor, but I plan to do it next turn. I need to do this quickly. You notice that I've been dragging on this game so much. It took me so long just to get 4 big eyes on each of the 4 servers. In fact, it took so long, there are only 6 cards left in R&D. Yeah, this game has dragged on for a very long time. Even playing this game at 2 times speed for you viewers, we are already 20 minutes in and still counting. The Siphon goes in. Well, my opponent managed to find the money to break Chiashi, and they're gonna slow me down with a Siphon. Very annoying, not much I can do about that. Right, so what do we do here? I can jam the food here, but I almost certainly won't have the money to defend the food. Because I would need to spend 5 credits to advance the food and 2 credits to rest the Caprice at the base of the server with no Nisei token to protect it. So my only option here was to play the Restructure and Hedge Fund and then drop the food in the server ready to double advance it next turn. The win won't come next turn, but it will come the turn after. Hopefully I can hold on for just long enough to win the game. There are 5 agendas in the score areas combined and there's 1 in the remote. There are 3 left in circulation. 1 in each of the servers. The Nisei Mark II is in archives, the NAPD is in my hand, and the final NAPD is somewhere else in R&D, 1 in 5 cards. Unfortunately, my opponent knew what's up. The jig's up, there are too many face down cards in archives, I couldn't keep it a secret for long. They ran archives, and once I saw that sec testing wasn't pointed at archives, I knew I was done for. My opponent would find the Nisei Mark II at the bottom of the server, and happily steal it for the victory. Man, I really wanted to take this home, but I'm pretty sure I misplayed it. As mentioned, if you spot any misplays that I made during the game that I didn't mention, please leave them in the comment section. I'd love to hear on how I can improve my game. But for now, we'll talk about card choices in my deck, specifically with the combo of Hasty Relocation and Mutate. Thing is, there's actually another alternative. Instead of playing Hasty, I could play Heritage Committee instead. These cards have similarities and differences. Let's talk about them. First, their similarities. They both combo with Mutate very nicely in that they guarantee the control of the outcome. You don't really want to be playing Mutate blindly because there's a very good chance that you mutate a small ice into another small ice, thereby wasting your Mutate. What you really want to do is to top deck an ice from HQ onto R&D and then mutate so that you are guaranteed to mutate into that piece of ice that you top decked. And both Hasty and Heritage allow you to do that. They both also accelerate your game by providing you a draw 3. Both cards draw you 3 cards before you have to top deck a card, and this is actually quite crucial because not only does it draw you into more big ice that you can potentially top deck on your deck, more importantly, it also allows you to draw into key cards like Caprice Nisei or Chrysium Grid, thereby allowing you to start scoring out earlier. This can be very crucial against decks that excel in the late game. Now for the differences. Hasty Relocation allows you to top deck 3 cards, whereas Heritage only allows you to top deck 1. This is a very vital difference because Mutate shuffles your deck. Hasty Relocation essentially allows you to reshuffle up to 2 agendas or any other card you want back into your deck. And this is quite important for mitigating agenda flood that typically comes with drawing lots of cards at once. With Heritage Committee, you cannot mitigate Agenda Flood as such. However, it does not require you to return cards, which is actually quite important if you are trying to keep all the good cards in your hand. So if the draw 3 gives you lots of useful cards and you already have a lot of useful cards in hand, Heritage would be better than Hasty Relocation. This in practice very rarely happens though, because most of the time, what you really want is the pseudo-Jackson effect that I showcased during the game. I wouldn't say big, but one notable advantage is that Hasty Relocation only costs 0 to play. Heritage Committee costs 1 to play. This could make the difference between winning and losing a side game at the end of the game. Finally, there's one big advantage of Heritage Committee, and this game again showed it very clearly. Heritage does not have the downside of requiring you to trash a card off R&D. If you read Hasty Relocation carefully, it states that I'm not sure if it's an additional cost, but you need to trash a card off the top of R&D before you can start drawing and top decking your cards. And this trash a card effect could actually cost you the game, as it did in this particular scenario. However, given the choice, I would play Hasty Relocation over Heritage Committee, even though the Milt Nisei cost me the game. And the reason is actually quite simple. The Milt card actually kind of helps you sometimes. It's like playing Max Anarch. You want to build Max in a way that you can leverage not just the card draw that Max gives you, but also the 2 cards that you mill every single turn. So Deja Vu, Clone Chip, Retrieval Run, all these cards are good synergy with Max. Same thing here. If you are playing a Hasty Relocation combo, which I am, you purposely want to play more recursion cards. Cards like Friends is what I'm thinking of right here, which essentially turns your draw 3 into a draw 4, because if you mill a card like Chrysium Grid, you can immediately recur it with Friends if you wish to. So Hasty Relocation just gives you more power and more flexibility, and therefore I think is the superior card of the two to perform a mutate combo with. Finally, for those of you curious about my ice suite, here it is. That was what I was checking midway through the game when I was trying to do my blind mutate there. To note that there are only 6 big ice, I might have to increase this to 7 to assist in the blind mutates further. Also because there seem to be too many small ice. The ice that you want to mutate are realistically only these 7 right here: Yagura, Crick, Pup, and Vanilla. You don't really want to mutate Eli because Eli is one of the best taxing ice around. I wasn't very happy to mutate Eli this game. I was basically forced into a situation because my opponent was getting mileage out of unsuccessful runs on R&D. Against most other decks, I would never mutate an Eli. I would have mutated the innermost Yagura instead. So, very interesting concept. I always love mutate decks. I have a very soft spot for it, whether it's played with or without the Heritage combo or the Hasty combo. Go try it out for yourself. It's always very fun to evolve your ice as you do Pokemon. Thanks for watching, and happy net running. I'll see you next time.